So, good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining FCA Atlanta. This is another workshop that we're doing, and this one today is focused on cybersecurity maturity model, and it's sponsored by Soundway Consulting. And before we get started, just want to say a little bit about FCA. If you're not familiar with FCA, we've been around for more than 75 years. We have 30,000 members around the world in 140 chapters. And I'm the president of the Atlanta chapter. We have about 350 members here. We're a nonprofit collaboration between the federal government, academia, and industry. Federal government, mostly DoD, but also energy, intelligence, and homeland security. And then on academia, think Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, George Washington University, and a number of other institutions. And for industry, I came in through AT&T, but Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, a lot of large ag companies that are out there, but also some smaller companies like InfoSmart's a local sponsor, GTR is a local sponsor, Trenton Systems here is a sponsor. So about 1,600 of them around the world. And it's a kind of a thought leadership group that focuses on comms and how the United States can stay at the forefront of that. So when you see these conferences that they put on, in 2 weeks there'll be one in Baltimore Tech and Cyber. There'll be about 5,000 people there, and then later this year in Augusta, there's going to be Army Cyber. There's going to be about 5,000 people there. We're starting one up here in Atlanta in July. It's going to be on critical infrastructure, focused more on the civilian side of the house. We're going a little bit smaller, probably around 500 people, but we hope to build it. We think Atlanta's a good hub for a large conference. So with that being said, that's some of the stuff we've got going on. Check out our website. And Carter, you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So at the onset, Paul was asking if I'm going to need a microphone. I don't think I'm going to need a microphone. I think everybody can hear me okay. Then hear me before my wife. What you can get it, shut it all up. Okay. So for today's session, first, I'd like to be able to thank each and every one of you for being able to take time out of your schedule to be able to come here, especially in the morning. Just out of curiosity, how many people have traveled more than 10 miles to get here? More than 20, more than 40. All right, well, even still, so 20. And for those that had to drive 20 plus miles, how long did it take you to get here?
50 minutes.
About 50 minutes. I'm coming about 15 minutes on the other side of the Braves Stadium.
Yeah, so there's an investment, not just the time to sign up and pay for it, but also time to be able to commute back and forth and attend today's session. So for today's agenda, we're going to give you some highlights about Soundway. We're going to talk about CMMC, current status and expectations. Then we're getting workshops. What do we mean by the workshops? Each of you was provided some documents in front of you. These are going to be worksheets that we're going to expect you to actually work on. Does everybody have one? Do you not have one?
I don't, but I have no clue about working on this stuff, so I'm going to just sit back and watch and collaborate with the others.
You know, you have to participate. This is
And
so when I ask what is code, what is a code, you're not going to get mad at me then, all right?
and what I would like to ask is, when we're getting ready to do the actual exercises, not including Paul, we have a total of 7 people here. I like to go into a team of 4 and a team of 3. All right. The reason why we're going to take this approach is rather than coming to another conference and hearing SMEs drone on about cyber, what we're going to do is we're going to actually give you real world scenarios. We're going to let you work on those scenarios. Not only will you be able to be evaluated by an SME such as myself, but you will also be able to learn from one another. And quite frankly, that's where we have seen a lot of value in taking this approach. Previously in Huntsville, we look to be able to take this model elsewhere throughout the country. So just kind of like good lay of the land here. How many people here actually represent a defense contractor? How many are consultants? Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. So as we were just talking about earlier, Soundway, small business, upzone, woman-owned, STV, OSB, been around for over a decade. And in the course of doing that has primarily been focusing on mission support for the defense intelligence arena, federal agencies, and within the past 2+ years on the commercial side of the house. Carter Schoenberg, had been in the cyber industry now for 23 years. Actually started my career in law enforcement right next door in DeKalb County, and then cut my teeth in the private sector with a company called Internet Security Systems that was based over in Sandy Springs and eventually got bought out by IBM. I still say to this day, I was very fortunate to be exposed to arguably the best and the brightest that the industry had to offer worldwide. And as a result of that, have spent a number of years working in a SOC, providing consultative guidance, working on behalf of the government, working on behalf of industry, supporting the government, and working on behalf of industry, helping industry. I've been with Soundway now for closing in on about 2.5 years. And I was brought on board primarily for launching our business to business service offering for that business to government market space. Specifically, the cybersecurity maturity model certification. Now, it was already brought to my attention from at least one of the attendees that, hadn't even heard of CMMC. So kind of like level setting where everybody is at. The cybersecurity maturity model certification was essentially born out of a need that was decided upon by the Department of Defense as a result of looking at how things had been done for many, many years and realizing it wasn't working as intended. And what do I mean by that? The government for many years, starting in January 2017, became effective, where you would have a defense for acquisition regulation clause in there that specifically called out, if you are going to get this award, that you are on the hook for properly safeguarding, control, and classified information, which was still kind of like a new nomenclature industry-wise, but it actually, the whole CUI designation has been around since 2007. So if you're familiar with terms like for official use only, sensitive and unclassified, law enforcement sensitive information, these are all like the legacy type of markings that are now essentially defined as control and classified information. Now, to be in conformance with this DFARS clause, you had to be able to demonstrate that you were going to be in alignment with NIST Special Publication 800-171. For those of you that are not familiar with this particular special publication, National Institute for Standards and Technology, they come up with guidance documents. Now everybody says, oh, what's the standard? If you talk to people over in Gaithersburg, they make it very clear, we do not create standards. We create guidance documents. Standards are predicated upon those guidance documents.
It's like the pirate code. They're more like guidelines.
Exactly. So there were 110, well, actually at the original one, there was 109 controls that came out in version 1. And subsequently there became 110 controls. Well, what the Department of Defense and frankly, even federal agencies were starting to see at that point, chronologically were, let's say, 2018, that it was becoming crystal clear that organizations did not have a level of cyber hygiene that they were conveying as a result of winning that contract. And the problem is, industry looked at this as another government regulation that they're never going to police. And guess what? The government never policed it. So it kind of created this easement of don't ask, don't tell. And during that time frame, a lot of our advanced technologies and intellectual property has been siphoned off. The bad guys learned a long time ago. So if you're going to try to go at Homeland Security, if you're going to try to go at Department of Defense, trying to come at them through the front door is probably not going to be a high return on your time and value. So how do you get to these organizations? You get to them through their supply chain, because they understand that these supply chain components, when I say supply chain, you might be thinking Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, which is true, but it's also the mom and pop shops that hold case codes that support these four organizations. Now, when you're talking about the risk posture of those types of organizations, it's a problem. And it is a problem that has existed for years and it's going to continue to exist. But I think for me personally, if I was a betting man, the tipping point of when the government made a final decision was back in 2018. So our tech for the F-35 and F-22 had already been siphoned. That had already gone over to China. You guys may recall that there was a NSA contractor who was working on offensive technologies, which is what they're chartered to do. Long story short, person of advancing years was kind of feeling the pinch from the newer generation, wanted to try to catch up with that person, with that team, brought his work home, which was a big no-no. Russia had all eyes and ears on that tech. Not only did they steal that tech, again, offensive weapons technology, offensive cyber technologies, they used those offensive cyber codes against American interests. But in my opinion, the tipping point was when the U.S. Navy's defensive Navy software was called Sea Dragon. Once the government was able to determine if that wound up in the hands of China, I think you probably had a meeting of the minds where the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, guys, enough's enough. We can't trust them. This whole self-attestation does not work. So how are we going to address this? And there was, from the start of 2019, even 2021, considerable pushback between industry and government, and between industry and even industry, because industry stakeholders would be like, okay, well, we want to step up. We want to be able to help you. Government was very much the position of, there's no way we're going to be able to scale to address 300 organizations. Then you had other industry stakeholders saying, well, wait a second, you're creating a cottage industry. And isn't this inherently a government responsibility in the first place? Well, anyway, fast forward, now you're in late 2021. The first iteration of CMMC had already been updated to CMMC 2.0. So the whole notion of, is this going away, seemed to be waning. If anything, people started to understand what's going to go forward. But then, like that, literally like that, the Department of Defense became almost persona non grata with industry. Nobody was talking about it. The road shows that they used to do when Katie Arrington was there no longer took place. Now, granted, COVID had an impact on that, but the lack of communication and guidance from the Department of Defense really led industry to take the position of, you know what, this is never going to happen. So organizations continue to kick the can down the road and roll the dice, because people in industry looked at this as essentially another government requirement, and that's it. The problem with this is people kind of conflate, they kind of mix together the DFARS requirement and CMMC. All that the CMMC is a third-party way of validating that you're not in breach of contract. So regardless if CMMC is delayed or not, contractually, you're already kind of on the hook for these safeguarding requirements. And we're going to be talking about that in just a couple of minutes. And it's also very important to note that when CMMC 2.0 went live in late 2021, within 45 days prior to that, the Department of Justice launched a brand new investigative division called the Civil Cyber Fraud Division. Their charter is to look at organizations that have misrepresented their cyber hygiene in order to get a government contract. Now, does that necessarily mean that they're going to be coming knocking on your door, full breach entry, SWAT teams and stuff like that? No, because this is a civil matter. But the outcomes of those civil matters can actually lead to a criminal prosecution. Again, industry took the position of saying, you know what, good for them. There's 300,000 government contractors. How in the world are they ever going to police this? And guess what? My response to that is, they're not going to have to. We have probably all heard this term, whistleblower, and whistleblower protections. Well, under a False Claims Act, if you have the person that's ringing the bell, they're called a relator or realtor. I think it's called a relator from a legal definition. Not only do they have whistleblower protections, they enjoy a cut of the penalty obtained by the US government. Most recently, Aerojet Rocketdyne, which does hypersonic technologies, lost to the relator for a fee of $9 million. The relator, which was a former CISO that was fired that called them out on that, I might add, took 30% of that. Now, regardless of what we think about the integrity, the professionalism of our employees and our business partners,
He talks, BS walks.
facts. What my 16-year-old daughter and her friends, facts. All right. That's just the way it is. And this is going to be becoming more and more pervasive. Most recently, show of hands, anybody here familiar with the Jelly Bean case? Okay. You're disqualified from answering. So, Jelly Bean is a small, less than I think 25-person company that does web hosting. And they did web hosting for an outfit that had to make sure that they were going to be HIPAA compliant. Anyway, long story short, website got hacked, thousands of client records were exposed, and somebody rang the bell on them saying, no, you misrepresented. False Claims Act brought by the Department of Justice. Now, was this a multi-million-dollar case? No, it was not. It was just under $300,000. But that was for a small business. So this notion of, oh, they're only going to go after the bigs, that has now proven to be factually inaccurate. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about, and I want you to kind of think about while we're going through these exercises, because at the end of the day, I want you to have an understanding of what's going to be required for you to be successful in obtaining your level 2 certification. But I also want you to give some thought with respect to, if I own a commercial enterprise, in addition to being in conformance with CMMC, I still have a legal obligation to meet the duty of care. Duty of care means in a reasonable circumstance, what would a reasonable, prudent person do to properly safeguard your information? And parting shot before we get into this, several years ago, I gave a presentation up in Washington, D.C. at MITRE. And for context, there was probably about 125 attendees, 5 of which were government people, 5 were probably attorneys, the rest were all defense contractors. Now, here's the scenario I'm going to give you. You had a small business with an 8A designation in Virginia. They just won a very large contract to support Navy in San Diego. Big feather in their cap. CEO is already eyeing that 50-foot yacht. Everybody's happy. Now, a year downrange happens and something goes bump in the middle of the night. I posed the question to the audience, well, what do you have to do? And the responses were interesting because they weren't wrong. They were just incomplete. Well, you have to focus on what was the asset that was impacted in the first place. You have to contain it. You have to successfully eradicate the threat. You have to notify Department of Defense in 72 hours. I said, that's a good point. It's interesting, though. I didn't hear one person say that they had notified California's Attorney General. And very indignantly hearing people saying there's nothing in the federal contract that says you have to do that. The lawyers in the audience, is that argument going to hold? And you just heard this booming, no, it's not. That because you are a defense contractor does not mean that your legal exposure is limited just to the federal contract. Okay, so let's talk about CMMC stats and what to expect and how to prepare. So kind of gave you a little bit of the history lesson with regards to CMMC 1.0 and Advanced 2.0. Also, for those of you that didn't have familiarity with the with CMMC, another challenge that existed was that when this whole concept of CMMC was coming about, its formulation was concluded by government, academia, beltway bandits. What could possibly go wrong, right? Now, in addition to the NIST Special Publication 800-171, they also had additional controls that came from another doctrine that was created by Carnegie Mellon called the Resilience Maturity Model. And it's actually a wonderful framework, but it's kind of like an academia utopian view of how things should be done. It's very, very hard to implement, especially at the small and mid-size. So there was a lot of pushback as a result of that. Once you got to CMMC 2.0, That part was stripped out. You now only have to conform with 800-171. Another factor that took place under version 1.0, whether you were at level 1, level 2, they had like, I think 5 levels at that point. Everybody had to be certified. Well, with 2.0, you now have 3 levels. 1 is still pretty much 1. 2 basically means that you're going to have access to control and classified information. And then 3 means that not only do you have access to control and classified information, but you are acting on military programs of significant importance. So think of like space military applications, things along those lines. We have some people here from Huntsville. You're down in Huntsville and you're supporting like that kind of ecosystem, more regardless of your size, more likely than not, you might be under the auspice of having to perform with level 3. The level 1 went from having to be independently assessed to now you can self-attest back to it. But regardless if you're level 1, level 2, level 3, each and every year, the CEO or president of that company has to sign an attestation in wet ink that you are in conformance with that level of compliance. Make no mistake, these documents that are physically signed will be used as evidence for a False Claims Act if you willfully misrepresent. So, question here: how many people here have ever heard the term SPURS? Okay, for those of you not familiar with that, SPURS stands for the Supplier Performance Risk System. And as CMMC was kind of being codified, the Department of Defense came up with additional DFARS that basically stipulated you had to go ahead and assess yourself against the Department of Defense assessment methodology, which basically is a weighted system against all 110 controls from 800-171. And it's weird because you start at the highest level possible, which is a score of 110. And then you subtract points for each thing that you're not doing. So you can actually have a negative score by default. Well, what a lot of companies started to do is, oh, I'm super awesome. My score, 110. Boom, putting it in the system. DIDCAC, which is the agency that is acting on behalf of the government to come out and do spot inspections of defense contractors. They don't have like arrest powers or anything like that, but they are the organization that operates under DCMA to validate, are you potentially misrepresenting what your scores are? Now, a few months ago,
DIPCAC.
DIBCAC, DIBCAC.
Defense Industrial-Based Cyber Assessment
Center. Yep.
Better know that.
Yeah, so because they are the ones that, because when we became a C3PAO, we were one of the first 25 C3PAOs. That's the organization that came out to independently assess us. And for us to become a C3PAO, we had to even go above and beyond 800-171 to be able to demonstrate that we're qualified to do these assessments on behalf of the Department of Defense. But coming back to these first scores, a report was released earlier this year by DIBCAC that said that whatever was being reported by industry was categorically skewed to the point where even organizations that thought that they were over 100 points were on average in the 30s. So part of this exercise hopefully will help you understand how those type of deficits might be occurring. Do I think on any bell curve that you're going to have individuals that are going, I don't care, fine, it's 110. Yes, I do. Do I also think that there was a greater percentage of organizations that just didn't understand the nature of the control and the questions you should be asking? Yeah, I think that's probably a higher percentage. Because the moment everybody started hearing we had to conform with 800-171, what did business do? You're my IT guy. Go read up on it. Okay. So you have 110 controls. But if you don't look at the assessment objectives, which comes out of 171 alpha, you have this mismatch. Because it's important to understand, we're going to be talking about this. Regardless of the control, if you have any of the objectives not met, by default, that control is not met, which means you then need to subtract that amount from your first score. Also, what the DIBCAC was able to find is a less than desirable percentage of organizations that submitted a SPUR score that did not have a system security plan. Why is this a concern? Because according to the Department of Defense's assessment methodology, by default, if you do not have an SSP, you should not be submitting a SPUR score. Period. So there was a number of different challenges that had existed as a result of that. And now, most recently, and we're going to be talking about this in a minute, there was a new DFARS clause that became ratified. And we'll be talking about that in a minute. So DFARS 252-204-7024. This came out in March. Now, keeping in mind what it says, it requires them to consider, contracting officials to consider. It doesn't say that they must, doesn't say that they shall use, but it does require them to now consider your SPURS score as part of your evaluation criteria for an award. Now, to me, that should be telegraphing to each and every one of you. That's acting as a bridge. That's acting as a bridge until DFARS 7021 becomes ratified. Now, information that came out last year supported that the Department of Defense anticipated that 7021 was potentially going to be ratified between March and May of this year. As being part of the CMMC ecosystem and having access to information that the general public does not have, I can tell you with a high degree of confidence, we are really now looking at probably early 2024, January, February, minimum timeframe for that. Doesn't mean you should be taking your foot off the gas pedal, because we're going to be talking about the realistic timelines. Show of hands, how many people here are familiar with the name Katie Arrington? Okay, so Katie, she was the champion of this. She worked for the Department of Defense in acquisition and sustainment, and then she was anointed as like their CISO. The one thing that Katie was challenged with was regards to understanding the actual timelines necessary to implement these controls. Now, with fairness to Katie, the reason why was because of how she was being counseled by academia and some Beltway bandits. Because she was conveying, you need about 6 months to be able to make this happen, which is categorically a misrepresentation. If you are starting from scratch and you're just now starting to look at how do you construct your system security plan, I'm just telling you, historically speaking, you are looking at no less than 3-4 months to have a system security plan that one will pass an independent inspection. That's the first part. Second part is, then you have to be able to start to fix what you identified was missing. Your get well plan, they call them POAMs, plans of actions and milestones. Let's add a few more months for that. So now you're in a really good position. Are you done yet? Nope. Because once you're getting ready to be certified, you have to demonstrate that all of these controls have been what they call operationalized. So as an example, if your system security plan indicates that you perform a vulnerability scan quarterly, and your system security plan is 8 months old, the assessor is going to look at it and go, well, you're only showing me this one time, but yet you're saying you've done it quarterly. That's what we mean as an example of, are the things that you have in your system security plan operationalized?
Seems like realistically, she should have put out at least 2 years to have enough data. So you're looking at least probably a 24-month minimum.
I don't necessarily know I would agree with that, but I would say that if you focus on the creation of the system security plan and then the POAMs,
Right.
you're at probably about a 6-month window. Then you got to operationalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to actually have to find a C3PAO, because guess what? While that company's kicking the can, guess who else is kicking the can? Everybody else. Okay. So once this goes live, according to the Department of Defense's Chief Information Security Officer, out of around 300,000 government contractors, or 200,000 according to him, whatever number you decide to use, over 80,000 are going to have to be certified. So when those RFIs and RFPs start hitting the street, anybody here ever been on the subway platform in New York City? Peak time,
Yeah.
And when those doors open up and you got like 400 people all trying to cram through that same door, that's exactly what's gonna happen in this marketplace. And unfortunately, industry really doesn't have anybody to blame but itself. So you then have to find one, you gotta get on their schedule, then you actually have a pass. So you could be looking at a minimum runway of at least 12 months minimum. So just that's something to keep in mind with regards to what we have seen historically and what was with what we feel was miscommunicated about 2 years ago with respect to that. So, you got some time, right? I mean, it's March, it's April. So if we're talking about looking at the end of this year or early next year, I got about 8-10 months. I'm looking pretty good, right? Well, just a second there, Professor. No, not necessarily. All right. And the reason why is because, again, was what I was saying before. All that CMMC is a third-party way of validating what you have already put yourself on the hook for contractually. So again, from a contractual perspective, if you don't have an SSP and you don't have the POANs, guess what? I mean, you by default are already going to be in breach of contract. The fact that the government hasn't called industry out on it, if this applies to industry or anybody in this room, is irrelevant. It is still a matter of legal doctrine. And it is still a matter of understanding that this is a level of exposure that should not be acceptable to any organization. Because this will range everything from a fines and penalties up to including termination notices. Yes.
So I got a question about that. So how many C3 POAs are PAOs are there right now?
As of right now,
38.
38.
Okay. So with all the companies out there trying to get certified, okay, or they're considering this, there's obviously not enough people to go out there and do the.
That's correct.
Right? So are they taking, if we hit fiscal Q1, right, when they say, okay, this drop dead date, if you're not officially certified by a C3 PAO, can you still be considered certified as a CMMC even without the stamp? Or, okay, so all those companies that have not, because there's not enough. I mean, you don't have enough assessors.
Right, and keep in mind, this is for future contract awards, not existing contract awards.
Right.
So you can operate and continue to work on your existing contracts, but once the flag goes up and CMMC is live in the DFARS, will have to be included in solicitations where the content of this solicitation has CUI, or the product that is, the service or products that are being produced may have CUI by, either included in it or being produced by it. So those solicitations come after the flag goes up. And then on contract award, you must have your certification or else.
What if you can't get somebody to come in and certify
Yeah.
in time?
Then you're not going to be able to bid on the new work.
What, you can bid on it, you just can't win it if you don't have it in place by the time.
That's
it's
it's a misnomer.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a bottleneck with
Yeah.
acquisition.
Yeah, so I mean, so to the point of, okay, academically speaking, can you bid on it? Yes. Would you be able to be certified by the time of award? Absolutely not.
Right.
So there's really no point. But I will trump that by saying, while we're focusing on that, there is a DoD memorandum to KOs and COTARs. If they identify right now that they think that you are not in conformance and they have information to support that, they have the absolute legal right to stop payment today on invoices.
Well, they could have done that anytime though, because it's a NIST issue, not a CMMC issue, because this has been in place for a long time.
Right.
It was a part of the DFAR.
Yeah.
But again, that goes back to my original point of industry looked at it, so they're never gonna police it, and they never police it. But now they're getting to a point where they are in fact starting to police it. Does that mean that they have the bandwidth to go after and really evaluate 300,000 companies? No, we're being realistic about that.
Yeah.
But if you're on a program of critical mission support to them, like as an example, if you're supporting White Sands Missile Range, yeah, you're probably gonna be scrutinized pretty closely. And when the DipCat comes out saying, okay, well, you said you have to score 110, you're at 40. And then that goes over the KO. That KO has the absolute right to go, shit.
Well, right, see, that's the issue that my clients are facing. It's kind of like, okay, some of them are like, let's wait and see. Then there's other ones that, 'cause you can't do a self, that's it. You can evaluate yourself
For level one.
for level one, right? But for two, which is the majority of my clients in Huntsville, for instance, they are struggling with, I wouldn't say struggling, but there's a couple points, and I don't want to take this up, but take all this time. But one of is cost. What's it gonna cost for the assessment?
Yep.
And that's probably gonna be predicated on, I don't know, right? Everyone's gonna be done on a case by case basis. And because the government is mandating certification, if you will, are they gonna cap your fee? Because it's gonna be like a matter of, I mean, I don't know how the pricing model is gonna work, and I'm wondering how.
What I can share with you is, at least from my vantage point, in the CMMC ecosystem of C3PAS.
Can they get that reimbursed?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask.
So my responsibility will be.
In your rack rate, oh,
my
in your rack
responsibility
rate, that's
in
it.
your back rate for reimbursement. However, with regards to. Apologize, that was the second, your question was
Capping the.
capping, no.
Yeah.
So right now, as it stands right now. The cyber accreditation body, which is the body of authority that has the oversight of this, they are not telling industry what they should be charging. I can tell you right now, if you are a company under, let's say, 200 employees, single place of performance, level 2 certification on average is gonna run you about $50,000-$60,000.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. It's not a single place performance. So there'll be multiple locations where they have personnel spread
No,
out.
no, I understood. I'm not saying generally, that's the size.
Yeah,
of your
yeah, yeah.
Organization,
That's what I'm
100,
doing,
200
yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be expecting about a $50,000-$60,000 price tag for that. But again, that's something that has to be considered, and how are you gonna include that into your overall wrap rate? And God forbid you have a GSA schedule.
Yeah.
Anybody here ever had to try to rechange a GSA schedule? Now, we're only talking about it for the purpose of right now, Department of Defense.
Right.
Yeah.
Guys, it's coming. So at CMMC Day, which is gonna be next month up in the DC area, one of the people giving the keynotes, his name is Larry Hale. I've known Larry for quite some time. He heads up GSA's program. Make no mistake, GSA and NASA, they are the next ones aboard this train.
Oh, yeah.
And the 8A Stars contract, 8A Stars 3
Yeah.
already has it included. The CMMC requirement.
And they're not, I'm sorry, and they're not going to necessarily say CMMC, but they are gonna specify 800-171. Which for all intents and purposes, you're.
But they have been, haven't they?
Well, the 800, yeah, 800-171 has been required of all federal contractors, DoD or civil, since January 1st, 2018. But like I said, there's no teeth to it. I started Soundway in 2011 after the Women-Owned Small Business Program was released by SBA.
Right.
But there's no teeth behind that program saying the government has to, it's no teeth like 8A, that has more teeth behind it. But when I read the draft DFARS and everything about CMMC, I was like, wow, this thing has teeth behind it. So companies that are saying, let's wait and see, are shooting themselves in the foot.
I know.
So I have a question on subcontractors. Is that?
Subcontractors must have the CMMC level certification of the work that they will be doing on the contract, or else they cannot perform that work. So if let's say the prime is doing CMMC level 2, but
Right.
work that this sub does is only at the level 1 level. If they have level 1, they're good to go. But
Okay.
if it's level 2, they have to have level 2, or they cannot perform.
Question. Okay, now we do have level 2 non-prioritized, so grouping this 75,000 level 2s all into, you must have a triannual C3PAO assessment, that's just not correct. There are non-prioritized level 2s that will be allowed, although they're held to the 110, they will be allowed to self-assess.
While that is correct, the Department of Defense CISO has already said, while academically that is true, the likelihood that any one company would only be focusing on that versus the other is highly unlikely.
Well, again, when they come down to the costs of a C3PAO and you've got assessment prep and then a C3PAO, you're gonna see a lot of people really pushing that. And
But
again,
who's
actually,
pushing it, the contracting officer or the companies?
the companies themselves.
So the contracting officer is the one who says what it has to be.
But again, if it's non-prioritized, if you've been handed the verbiage in the contract, part of the contract states.
Right.
Right, so there, I hear a lot of CCPs just pushing the whole level two, when the documentation, I actually, just spoke with Buddy Dees on February 24th of this year. And he said there will be no reimbursement. He said, you people should have had this done with DFARS 252.204.712. That's there. So
He's
we're
correct.
not gonna, reimburse.
Yeah, there is no reimbursement. The only way a company, yeah,
Right, but for certification there is.
Well, he.
but it's not direct.
It indicates differently. Even when since CMMC one, there would be some kind of reimbursement, some
Yeah.
kind of incentive to get this done, and he took a very hard line with me. I said, well, I've kind of been misinforming people then, because, so I'm glad to hear that you said. And then finally, it is within 30 days of contracting.
Of what? To do what? To
You,
verify.
within 30 days of contract award, if you can prove that you're CMMC. Now, again, that's a real shotgun, and I've got a special rate, and I'm sure he has a very special rate for your 30-day preparation. I don't think it could be done, but
And
again,
you can't do it because you're not gonna show you're operationalizing it.
well, the thing, right, exactly, but if you're already on that journey. So we're
Yeah,
trying,
exactly, yeah.
see, I'm on the part of this thing, we're trying to calm people down and say, look, if you start the journey now.
Yep.
Right. so let's-
Absolutely.
Right, so it's gonna be one of those, when the lights go on, I'm not, no, you're almost there, and let's see if we can get you across that finish.
But I guess the point is, well, not a point, I would say that my response to the topic that you brought up is it's a to be determined, because we don't know what the contracting officials are going to mark these as. And if I was a company, even if I wasn't a C3PO, if I'm just a government contractor, I'm not gonna err on anything other than the side of caution.
And it-
And make no mistake, we clearly envision that we're gonna see contracts themselves marked CUI.
And Carter, also, if I'm an incumbent, or if I'm trying to unseat an incumbent, my, part of my and I have CMMC level 2 certified, part of my capture strategy is gonna be getting that contracting officer to put that in the contract.
And so, it's not just gonna be whistleblowers,
Yeah.
it's gonna be your competition.
Absolutely.
Get some information.
Nothing to do with whistleblower. I'm gonna try to influence the solicitation by talking, telling the contracting officer and the GPM, this needs to be level 2, and I'm gonna give them everything they need to rationalize why it's level 2 certified, because that, as a business developer, I gotta make this thing, I gotta influence that solicitation, so I go after it and I reduce the competition. So,
How many are there right now, certified as two?
How many companies are certified for CMMC?
Two.
0.
Yep.
Now,
Haven't
let's
started.
clarify that.
Isn't
there
There is a joint surveillance program. It's a voluntary program. The way that this works right now is these companies found a C3PAO.
Yep.
They submitted their name to the Department of Defense based on priority as defined by DIBCAG. They were then assessed at a DIBCAG high level, so no different than what we underwent, but supported by that C3PAO. Keep in mind, these were paid for engagements. What has been articulated time and time again is if you have completed this successfully, when CMMC is ratified, it carries over. There's nothing in writing that says that right now.
Oh, so they could have spent the money for naught?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. But there is no document of authority that says, if you do this, it transitions to this.
If you got policies and procedures in place, you're feeling pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm also keeping in mind, we're talking about, it's a little bit of another dynamic that we're seeing with industry. If you read this 80171, it talks about poems. You're allowed to have poems. However, you are not allowed to have any remaining open poems when you're attempting to become certified. Now, when the C3PAO comes in, if they have identified a gap, a material weakness, it's gonna go one of 3 ways. They're gonna say, okay, you got a finding here. You can fast track that within 5 days. It's not gonna even impact our report, our final report in 5 days. Option number two, you have an issue here. We're gonna allow this to be a POAM. And you have 180 calendar days to really resolve it. So you have like an interim certification. Or option three, yeah, you successfully met all 320 objectives, all 110 controls are done, and you get your green light to be level 2 certified.
I'm sorry, that's not.
No, please, let's hear it.
So, because you guys can do this.
Correct.
C3PA, okay. Because you jeopardized a potential contractor of getting an award and then having it taken away because you said you're good to go. What do you have in place? What kind of insurance, I mean, some insurance guy, do you have in place for professional liability to ensure that if you made a mistake and they have a financial loss in the third party, that you're protected?
So that's a great question. So with regards to what we have, we do have liability for first and third party damages,
Right.
which again, not to go off topic, but people hear, oh, I got cyber coverage. Okay,
Yeah.
do you have cyber breach coverage or do you have cyber liability coverage? They are not the same thing.
But I'm talking
Now,
about.
but to your point.
Yeah.
This is already, there are, let's just say, I'm not gonna name them, but there were a couple of naysayers of CMMC from word go, two in particular. And this was a question that was being brought up. The way that this works right now is because the accreditation body is basically the body of authority that reviews all the information. Okay, yep, you've done all your quality analysis, good to go there. You followed the CMMC accreditation process, you're good to go. Boom. And it goes in, and to your point, it's showing it's met. There's not gonna be an issue there, even downrange, if that company takes a breach. Where I would say that there might be an issue is if you tell a company you're not ready to go, and as a result, we're telling you that you're not met. As long as the basis for why you are not met is clearly articulated, and again, this is all part of the certification process.
Right.
You're supposed to have daily hot washes. You're supposed to be keeping your client in the know of where things are, what they call trending towards on each and every day.
Yeah.
And for us to become a C3PAO, we even had to come up with, a remediation process to this very nature. If ever called upon, that had to be approved by the cyber accreditation body. So is it a risk? I would say it's a threat, but the risk level of that is actually gonna be quite low. I think that you're gonna have more organizations that are, well, we thought we were in really good shape.
Well, right now, there's only 38 of them. So that means that they don't understand what your risk is.
Correct.
I
So,
mean,
but to your point, and again, just trying to be mindful on time, because I really want to get in these,
Yeah, sorry.
Just a real thing on the insurance part. I think what you were saying is if Sound needs a C3PIO and we bless somebody and they get their certification, but then they fail, where's our liability as Soundway? Our liability is on the day that we certify them, we've said, you showed that you can do everything and everything is in place. How they operationalize that, once we walk away, it's on them if they don't follow the rules.
Right. No, I get it. It's
Yeah.
a static date. I mean, it's, I,
snapshot time, yeah, absolutely. And also keeping in mind, what is required for this process is each piece of what they call objective evidence that the C3PA is looking for, that has to be retained by the government contractor, the organization seeking certification. The government, the Department of Defense actually has a tool that hashes that. So it's actually the obligation of the OSC to be able to say, okay, on this day, I gave you 20 artifacts. Do you acknowledge that you've received them? Okay, yep. Now I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna hash that, and I'm gonna keep that stored in my system, because that hash, like any kind of like MD5 checksum, if you will, but it's gonna sit there and it's gonna have a defined date, defined time, and that's gonna correlate with the findings from the C3PAO. So it's not like anybody, either the OSC or the C3PAO, can say, that's not what they showed us. Does that help answer?
It shows you to go with a good C3PO like this, because my insurance company's told me they're capping my errors and emissions on this at $1 million. That's, so pick somebody.
well, the reason I'm saying that is, and that we need to hire Easy, but the reason I'm saying, the reason I'm saying this is an opportunity for someone to go. For $100,000, I'll go ahead and give you a whitewash on a static time frame. Okay, now you're on the hook. So if this is a possibility where you can have a rogue assessor taking money off the top, getting the contract win in, and then really nobody's backdooring this thing on the follow-up assessment. So that's where my concern would be for one of 38 companies. And I'm being that way.
No, you're playing devil's advocate, and that's fine, we can war game this out 10 different ways from Sunday, but again, you have to understand that when that organization, the rogue C3KO submits all their stuff.
Yeah.
The accreditation body still has the obligation to review it. And quite frankly, even from the trainings that I have taken, what the ecosystem is trying to accomplish is taking the approach of, it's not just, let's pass this exam. In this particular case, the CMMC certified assessor. Let's make sure that we're all kind of operating off the exact same thought processes. So that way, for this particular control, you're not assessing it one way, but you'd be assessing it another way. They want to have like that level of consistency. Otherwise, the level of subjectivity could just be like a complete downward spiral. Yes, sir.
I had that. I was at a CMC conference in January. And one of the things I found just talking to different people that were trying to become, is it was all over the board. I had one person says, this is what you need. And then the next person says, I wouldn't pass you for that. You need this. And I'm like, what do I need?
Right. So that's a good question.
What is the same?
So I'm gonna take a moment of selfish position here.
Oh.
While we are C3PO, we also help companies prepare for it. Now, if we help you prepare, we are disqualified from being certified.
That was what I heard. Is that,
However,
that is the way. Okay.
we are the only game in town that warranties our work products. So as long as our recommendations are adopted in the face of a negative finding from a C3PO or other body of authority, including state attorney generals, we're gonna come in and either help you defend the basis of the position or remedy it for up to 40 man hours and no additional charge.
I just, I'm sitting there, there was an argument.
Yeah.
Same company, one person's doing the presentation, the other's in the back of the room, they're telling us two totally different things.
But I guess the question I would have now being there is,
That's
what were the
worrisome.
qualifications of those two individuals? Now, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, but again, we've seen it started, especially in 2020 and 2021. Just calling it what it was. There was a lot of snake oil being pitched out there. And unfortunately, we've seen on 2 occasions, companies that came to us asking for help because they realized that the work products that they were getting were subpar, and they were. And I feel horrible that these small businesses are spending tens of thousands of dollars to get a subpar work product, only to have to pay us to come in and clean it up for them.
Yeah, we've spent quite a bit to do the security. And I spent one, and we got a decent SPRS score. And then I had another pre-assessment done just late last year. And it was a lot worse than what we thought.
And I'd be willing to bet because the first organization only looked at it based on what the control says. And the other may have looked at what does the control say, but what do the objectives say? And remember what I said earlier, if any objective is not met, that control is not met.
Well, that was the last one we had. Like I said, we got a much lower score, but the issue is my procedures were tied in with the policies, which the first group said, yes, that's good. He was, no, you want a policy and you want a procedure, because I had the policies and the artifacts, but the procedure was missing. And so, I'd have a 5 if I had a procedure, but you have to get a 0 because you don't have that procedure there.
So I would say that individual came from a government background. From my perspective as a professional in this industry, as long as you have the documents and the documents convey what is corporate policy and then what are the procedures subordinate to that, that's all that really matters. There are a total of 14 control families. That means that under that dogma, you had that 14 different policies and procedures. For a small business, if you should, there's at least a couple of them that you might be able to consolidate into one. document of authority, but it doesn't change the fact that, you know, the devil's in the details, and you really have to have a good understanding of who have you commissioned to help you with that advice.
Yeah.
So, before we get into the workshop itself, so we're gonna go through two different scenarios. Now, fortunately, we've had a couple more people come in. What I'd like to ask is, since we have more people on this side than this side, I know you're saying that, but I still would like you to try to participate. If I may ask, if the three of you would please come over to these tables. I can get one up front and then one in the middle, and then that will be close enough. Okay, and then we're gonna call this team 1, team 2, team 3. When we go through these exercises, you're gonna be given tasks. Now, you have some documents in front of you. And feel free to use those for taking notes or to accomplish the tasks at hand. But before we do that, we're gonna talk about, in the CMMC realm, what's called a SPA, a security protection asset. This is actually one of the areas that is uniquely different between CMMC and the DFARS clause. And the reason why this is so critically important for everybody to understand is because this bears direct relevance on scoping considerations for what will be within your parameters. Gentlemen, please, if you don't mind.
Never.
I'll give you guys an indicator. Oh, we'll tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a quick bio break, let everybody get set up, and then we can go ahead and get started.
I retire.